Hi, everybody logging on. We're going to give everybody about a minute to log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, my name is Kelsey Helsper, and I'm a BCBA at Bierman. And tonight we are going to talk about encouraging peer and sibling play interactions for your child. So the objectives that we're going to talk about tonight are to understand the importance of play skills in general, to identify your role in sibling and peer interactions, and to review some ways to troubleshoot when problems arise within those interactions. So first off, I want to talk about your communication options for this webinar. Participation is strongly encouraged and can really help you relate to the content and apply it to your daily life. So I've had the most success with using the chat feature, which you should be able to find on your toolbar. I think yours is at the bottom. If you click on the chat, a chat box should open up, and then you will be able to type anything that you want in the chat. So if you have questions for me, or if we pause for participation, you can feel free to use that chat box either way. And you also have another option when you're using the chat feature. So where it says to, you can choose to panelists, and the panelist is only myself. Or you could choose panelists and attendees, and then your question is seen by all. So that is purely based on your preference. And just know that anything that you share with just me on that chat, I will not disclose any personal information about you or your child. So you can pick whichever feature you feel most comfortable with. But as I mentioned, I highly encourage you to participate and ask questions throughout. And we'll also have some time at the end to ask questions as well. So we also have a poll feature, and you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen right now. So I would love for you to answer this question. I just want to know, how much ABA experience do you have? I'll give everybody just a few seconds to answer. All right, so it looks like we're kind of across the board. So some of you have experience, some of you don't have any experience. So I welcome all of you, and hopefully you guys can all learn something about engaging with play with your child and other siblings and peers. So we're gonna have one more poll really quick. And this one is just for my knowledge. We've had a play series going for the last few months. So if you've attended any of those play webinars previously, will you just answer this question? All right, so it looks like we have all new faces. So welcome again, and I will make sure to go through more of the stuff that I already covered previously in the other webinars, just so you have that content as well. Okay, so we're gonna roll right into why play skills are important. So knowing what to expect out of your child's play can really help support your child as they learn to play with siblings, friends, and peers. So your support is crucial, and knowing how to support your child is really important. So in general, play helps to increase healthy brain development, increase communication and language development, develop and improve social skills, develop physical, cognitive, and emotional strength, and to provide an alternative to rigid and repetitive behavior. So it has a lot of benefits. So you wouldn't necessarily think that play would be doing all of these things, but it is very important in your child's development. So this is the last poll, I promise, but we're going to take one more poll just because I'm curious to know what your child's barriers are when it comes to playing with siblings and peers. So I believe that you will be able to select multiple answers here. So feel free to select any or all answers that apply to your child. And if you do select other, if you could supply that answer in the chat of what you mean by other, that would be great. All right, it looks like communication is a really big one. So that can definitely be difficult to figure out how to increase that communication between your child and a sibling or peer. So we're definitely going to talk about some strategies to help with that and all of those other areas as well. And thank you for supplying your answer. So another one that wasn't mentioned there is just not understanding imaginative play. So just not understanding what it's like to engage in pretend play. So thank you guys so much for your participation. We'll continue going here. So the 4 focus areas that we're going to talk about tonight when it comes to your engagement and your facilitation of the play interactions are these 4. So observing the interaction and observing your child playing before, making a plan. We'll talk about some strategies of how you can coach your child and also coach the sibling or peer. And then we'll talk some about reinforcement and how we can maintain and encourage those behaviors in the future. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about each of those here. So if you've attended a previous play webinar, which none of you have, but this step is very similar when it comes to engaging with your child at all during play. So whether that be when they're playing independently or when they're playing with others, really this step can apply to anything. So observing is essential to understanding your child and his or her play preferences. So it can also help you identify crucial information about the peer or the sibling that is involved in the interaction as well. You can identify if your child and the sibling or peer are able to communicate, which it sounds like that might be a pretty significant barrier for most of your kiddos. You can also get an idea if your child enjoys the play interaction with the peer or sibling, or if there are challenging behaviors that arise. You can see what those look like or see why they're happening if you're just observing. And as you're taking a step back and observing, try to pay attention to the ways that you're responding to the behaviors as they're happening as well. So are you providing a verbal reprimand if something negative is happening? Are you removing your child from the interaction? Maybe they're trying to escape the peer playing with them and then they're getting removed from the interaction. And actually that could be really reinforcing for them. So really you want to pay attention to the way that your responses could also be hindering their ability to play in those settings, and really focus more on the proactive ways that you can be setting that interaction up for success. All right, so it's also important to observe similarities and differences between the play styles and preferences of your child and the peer or sibling. So are there any play items that they both enjoy? If so, that would be a great activity to start with so that they both have interest in those items. And if not, you can try to look for the things that your child and sibling or peer like to do with those items. So maybe they don't like playing with the same item, but they like doing the same action with different items or an action that's similar. So pay attention to those things because that will really help create buy-in from your child and the peer or sibling in those interactions. So if your child has a difficult time with sharing materials or taking turns, it might also be best to avoid items that have limited amount of pieces and instead gravitate toward items that have many pieces and could be separated and enjoyed individually, but close together. So blocks would be a good one. Maybe it's 2 different puzzles or cars, something like that, that has lots of different pieces. So they didn't have to keep taking turns or sharing if that skill is going to be a little too hard. And lastly, it's also important to spend part of your observation identifying the different play levels of each child. So that could be your child is at a higher play level than the sibling or peer. It could be flip-flop. So the sibling or peer could be at a higher play level than your child, or it could be that they're at similar play levels. And we're going to talk about how you can cater your interactions based on those different play levels as well. So first, let's talk about if your child is at a level above their sibling or peer that they're trying to play with. So you're going to want to find ways for the child to interact or prompt the sibling or peer without being aversive. And you're going to want to start by playing at the sibling or peer's level, since they are at a lower play level. So for the sibling or peer, it's going to be more difficult for them to play at a play level above what they are used to playing at or what they're capable of. So it's best for the child to play down to their level. So some examples of what your child could be doing are they could be giving toys to the sibling or peer and trying to increase that interaction and the enjoyment that they're getting out of that interaction. You also could find social games that work for both. That might be a really good idea at this stage. So follow the leader is a great one. If the sibling or peer likes to imitate behavior, you could try peekaboo or hide and seek, chase. And chase could be unstructured. It doesn't necessarily have to involve all the rules. You could work on building towers. So it could be that the child builds the tower and then the sibling knocks it over, as long as that activity isn't super aversive for your child if it's knocked over. The child could blow bubbles and the sibling or peer could pop them. So there's lots of different ideas, but I would say the main focus here, if your child is at a higher play level than the sibling or peer, is to really try to focus on the play of the sibling and peer and bringing your child down to that level so that they can both have a successful interaction together. All right, so you guys get to meet my kiddos here. I really wanted to try to give you some video examples of what this could look like and how you as the parent could be involved in this interaction. So in this video, the child in the blue, and that's going to be the child, and the sibling is going to be in the red. And the goal targeted within this video was turn taking. So let's take a look.
The idea we're going to take stacking. Let's let Archie stack one, Griffin. Archie's turn. Nice job. Griffin's turn. And now Griffin's turn to push. Woo! Down, 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 down. And Archie, it's Griffin's turn. Let Griffin do it. We're going to let Griffin have a turn. And Archie gets a turn. All right, Griffin's turn. Can you give this one to Griffin? Nice work, buddy. That's shaking. All right, Griffin. Archie's turn. Archie puts it in. You got it, buddy. And Archie, can you give this one to Griffin? Oh, give this one to Griffin. Good. All right, Griffin, give this one to Archie. Good job.
All right, so as you witnessed in this video, both children benefited from practicing turn taking. But you can see as the video went on, each of them were more compliant with giving the blocks and giving up the blocks and waiting their turn as we continued practicing. So since they were both struggling with this skill a little bit, I had to be more hands-on than maybe you want to be, but just know you're working toward a larger goal. So you may have to be more involved right now while your child and the peer sibling are really learning a new skill, but just try to think of ways that you can fade back as you continue practicing. These are the types of adjustments that you'll be able to decide upon in the moment too. So you may need to make more in the moment decisions as the interaction goes on, but just know any practice at all that they're getting with the skill, even if you're heavily involved, is just getting them closer to the ultimate goal of playing together on their own.
idea we're going to.
Okay, so now let's talk about if the sibling or peer is engaging at a higher play level than the child. So this is where pairing can be extremely useful. And since a lot of you don't have any prior ABA knowledge or experience, pairing is just when we do something that makes the activity better or more fun. And really, it's making something that they already enjoy. It's pairing yourself or the child or sibling or peer with that activity, which in turn makes them more fun. So you can kind of get an idea whenever you're in the observation stage. Does the sibling or peer like adult attention? And if they do, then you can give them a lot of praise and really be involved with them and giving them your attention whenever they're doing something really great and engaging in that new play behavior. Or if you're noticing that your child is really not enjoying when the sibling or peer is even close to them, then you can know that you need to really focus on pairing them together. So in the previous video example, by having them give the blocks to each other at the end of that video, I was really trying to pair them together with that activity. So they're getting the block from the peer or the child, and that is helping them understand that good things are coming from the sibling or peer as well. You're also going to want to find an activity that your child can do easily that is also entertaining to the sibling and peer. And I'm sure that's much easier said than done, but just try to think of something your child's going to need to contact success, or else they're going to get frustrated in the interaction. But also the same thing could happen with the sibling or peer if they're bored of playing in a way that doesn't interest them. So finding that appropriate balance is going to be really important. And then activities with varying levels of play that the sibling or peer can model would be really great activities to focus on as well. So trains, having the sibling or peer show them how to push the train on the track, and then the child can imitate that, putting a car down a car ramp or crashing the cars together, building up a Lego tower or trying to knock it down, any type of art and craft activity like playing Play-Doh, smashing the Play-Doh, coloring with a marker, anything like that, that the sibling or peer, you could kind of coach them in how to do these things. And then you could hope or show the child that they can engage in those behaviors too. So example skills to target here, if you are dealing with a sibling or peer at a higher level than your child, are requesting to each other. So that's going to be another great way to pair. If your child requests for something and the sibling or peer gives it to them, then you're pairing that sibling or peer with the delivery of something that they want. You could focus on sharing. You could simply just focus on reducing grabbing for items or grabbing things from each other. And kid-friendly strategies for the sibling and peer if the child is engaging in challenging behavior. So just prompting the sibling or peer to walk away or move out of reach. So whatever it is that is important for your child in the moment, the important thing is to find a goal that is attainable for both of them and really start small so that they are able to contact that success and you're able to give them a lot of praise for the things that they are doing. All right, so we're going to watch another interaction between my two kiddos. And in this video, we're looking at the child in the red and the sibling in the blue. So the goal for this activity was getting the sibling to prompt the child to learn a new play behavior, which was racing the cars down the car ramp.
Race their car down the fast. Can you put them at the top? Yeah. Okay, wait for Archie to get up there. Ready? 3, 2. You can say, not that way. Okay. There you go. Point and show them where to go. Where? Right here. Right here. Okay, ready, set, go. Good job. Nice sharing, guys. And Griffin, nice showing your brother what to do. My car is the fastest. Do you want to show him how to race again? My car. Your car's the fastest. Let's see which other cars are the fastest. Maybe you could, hey, before you take it out of his hand, what could you do? You could say, You say, Archie, can I have a turn? I have a turn. All right, Archie, then you give it to Griffin. Oh, he says, he wants one more turn. One more turn, and then it's going to be yours. There we go. Now, you must. Wait for Archie. Where is he? Show him where to put his car, Griffin. Okay, right here. Right here. Right here. Okay? Okay, right here. Good job. My car's the fast. Wow, your cars are both so fast.
All right, so as you can see, I was still heavily involved as the parent, but my role shifted from prompting the child to having the sibling prompt the child instead. So the only times I jumped in to provide physical prompts were when the sibling grabbed the car from the child. But once the situation was diffused, I was able to fade back out and only provide vocal prompts and reinforcement. So you can see that really had my involvement not been there, it probably would have been a much different interaction. So like I said, in the beginning, you may have to be heavily involved, but try to just notice how involved you are in the interaction and try to fade back as much as you can, so that they're able to engage in those play behaviors on their own. But you can see here too that we were trying to focus on that new play behavior, but a lot of other things happened within this too that were really great. I was trying to teach the sibling that he needed to ask before grabbing, and really just the child engaging in those behaviors after he was directed by his brother was already a pretty big accomplishment. So you can just focus on really small things. And you may not have a specific goal in mind in the beginning, and that's okay too. But just try to remember to celebrate all the little wins that are happening. Okay, so now lastly, let's talk about if the child and the sibling or peer are on the same play level. So you're going to want to find games that are preferred for both. So again, we talked about that in the observation portion. So you can observe what they like and choose materials that seem to suit both of them. If they're both at a lower level of play, you could focus on turn taking, making sure that their turns are short at first so that they get a lot of opportunities to practice the skill. You could focus on them requesting to one another for items, and even just parallel play. So if you don't know what that means, that really means that both children are playing in the same area or close to each other. They could even be manipulating similar items, but they're not necessarily cooperatively playing or engaging with each other. They're just playing closely together. So you're going to start wherever your child needs to start, but just know that that would be a good first step at just trying to pair the other child with those play items. And then if both of them are at a higher play level, you could work on different cooperative play, problem solving or negotiating with each other, expressing their feelings. So I don't like it when you grab my toy, things like that, or even really reinforcing their spontaneous sharing behavior with each other. All right, so now we're going to look at the child in the green, and we're going to say that the peer is the child in the white. Okay, so the peer in the white does a great job of voicing his wants within the activity and prompting the child to engage with the blocks appropriately or the way that he wants him to play with the blocks. So the child here in this example follows the peer's prompts, and they're able to build the tower successfully together. If you were the parent here looking in on this interaction and it did not go as you planned, you could direct your prompts to the peer, so the peer is still able to prompt the child, or you might have to jump in to be more involved, just depending on your child's needs in the moment. But those circumstances will all depend on how the interaction is going. And I wanted to make sure to show an example of what we would be aiming toward when it comes to cooperative play and playing with another individual. So really, this would be the ultimate goal, is that they're working out their problems on their own and they're communicating together. But as I mentioned, your child is probably not at this level yet. So taking those steps to get them to that place and focusing on small goals will be your best bet in moving in this direction. Okay, so then it's important to come up with a plan. So part of that plan is creating goals. So what skills do you want to target? Figuring that out and making sure to start small. So make sure the goal is achievable for your child always. And if you make a goal that's a little too hard, just know you can make modifications to make it easier for them or to change your goal in the process. So you don't have to stick to that goal, but you just want to make sure that your child's not getting out of something by doing something inappropriate. So we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But you also want to think about, what is your desired time frame for play? So in your mind, I would specify an initial duration that would be successful for your child. Maybe in the beginning, it's 30 seconds to a minute. Maybe you work up to 5 minutes, but I would say expecting your child to play with their sibling or peer for much more than that in the beginning would probably be too hard of a goal to start with. I would say focusing on smaller durations in the beginning and working up to that goal systematically will be a really great way to make sure that the interaction maintains success. And then you also want to think about, how will the sibling or peer be incorporated within the interaction? Will they be a part of the entire activity? Will you only want them to jump in at certain times, like to hand a block to your child or to provide an item after your child requests? So you really want to think about how the peer or sibling is going to be involved and how long you'll want them to be involved. And then it's really important to make it fun for both children involved. So what is your plan for keeping your child engaged in the activity? Are you going to provide a lot of praise? Are you going to try to get the peer or sibling to do something really silly that they enjoy? Another example, if your child's sibling loves to play the role of helper, you could keep them engaged by allowing them to fulfill that need and be your helper in the interaction. So that can be a really great way to keep the peer sibling motivated. Or if a peer is showing interest in kicking a ball, but your child wants to throw the ball in the basket, you could let the peer know that first they would be making it in the basket together, and then they could transition to kicking it. Whoever is at a higher play level, I would say focus on them doing the waiting first before the other person, and taking turns that way can try to keep it more successful. But these simple gestures can go a long way if the children know that they're receiving good things from the activity too. So the more that they enjoy the interaction, the more they're going to want to do it again. And an example of how you could do each of these things, so really breaking it down for yourself. I'm such a visual person, so things like this really help me, and you could adopt whatever system seems to work for you. But putting it in a table format here, I chose a target skill of completing an animal puzzle. I decided that my duration would be for 1 minute, that the sibling or peer would be handing the puzzle pieces to the child. That's how they would be involved. And then the way that I decided we would make it fun is that me and the sibling or peer make different animal noises as the child puts those pieces into the puzzle. So it could be as simple as that. It could be, more complex than that, but it's whatever you choose for your child. Okay, so your involvement. You may or may not be involved in the interaction. So things like this usually depend on, one, your interest in being involved. And if your child or peer and the peer or sibling require more supervision or prompting, then like I said, you may just have to be more involved in the beginning. You saw my videos with my kiddos. They're not quite to the point where they can play like that on their own. So I did have to be heavily involved. But the hope is that with the more practice that they're getting, they will learn to engage in those skills on their own when I'm not present. But juggling parent, child, and sibling or peer interactions all at once can be really difficult. And I definitely understand that. So try to just focus on the needs of one person at a time and recruit help if you need it. So let the helper, so maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's another parent, the other parent of the peer, but let the helper know what your plan is so that they can be an active observer for you. So maybe they can observe some things that you're not able to observe as you're moderating, and then give them key aspects to look for. So maybe warn them about some of the challenging behaviors that could happen, or maybe have them be a standby for blocking something like grabbing behavior, but let them know their role and expectation. So should they sit back and be involved, or should they be upfront in the interaction? You really just want to let them know that beforehand so that too many people aren't trying to prompt and do all of these things at once, because that's probably not going to make the interaction as successful as you want. Okay, so the environment is also important to plan for. It's important to identify ways that the environment could have an effect on your child's ability to play with others. So, are there lots of distractions around in the environment? Are they the type of learner who kind of bounces around from thing to thing? If so, you're going to want to make sure that they are in a much more um, clean and less distracting environment. You're also going to want to make sure that they don't have access to too many items, because it's likely that once the sibling or peer comes to be involved, if they really don't want that interaction to happen, they'll probably just go find something else to play with. And then you also want to make sure that they have enough access to the things that they need in that interaction. So you don't want to have them be so reliant on you to get them things, or you to make that engagement successful. So make sure that they have all the materials that they need so that they can try to practice that independence and play with the peer or sibling. And then as we talk about coaching, we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but pairing is a really important step of knowing how to coach each individual. So, is the sibling or peer paired with your child? That's going to be important to identify from the get go, because that's going to change the way that you're interacting in that play interaction. Does your child understand that good things can come from the sibling or peer? It's likely that if the sibling or peer is not paired with your child, then they're not understanding that good things can come from them. So that's where you might need to start really small and have the sibling or peer handing them items that they enjoy, or showing them that they can be a fun part of that interaction. So you're going to start with sibling and peer pairing if, when a sibling or peer comes near the child engages in negative behavior, or a sibling or peer in parallel play interactions last no longer than a few seconds. So let's say you try to prompt the sibling to go and play with the child, and the child automatically gets up and moves to something else. Or let's say they hit the peer sibling, or they try to grab items from them and have it done their way. Those would be really significant signs of when it might just be important to step back and work on pairing. So if you feel like the sibling or peer is already paired with your child, that's great. You do still want to focus on pairing throughout the interaction so that something doesn't happen to make that peer or sibling aversive again. So pairing ensures that the activity remains fun all the way through, and it's best to proactively pair than to have to repair a relationship. So if you can provide those really fun reinforcement activities throughout the activity that keep them engaged, keep them motivated for each other, then you're not going to have to take a step back and repair if you focus on it all the way through. Okay, so let's watch a video of pairing.
Emerson, I love how you're letting Grayson be in front. That's being such a good friend.
All the time. Yes. You're my best.
That's so nice of you to say.
Oh no. Peace. Oh no. A piece.
What should we do?
So as you could see, the parent provided praise statements throughout the activity for the nice things that the siblings were saying to each other and doing for each other. And in turn, the sibling and child started providing those nice statements to each other on their own. So saying, "You're my best friend," and "You can go first all the time." So since the parent modeled these statements, the children began to imitate them and therefore started to become paired with the activity and each other. So as the interaction goes on, you can see that the children are enjoying the other being involved. And in that activity, it means that they know that good things are coming from one another. Okay, another part of coaching is prompting. So prompting refers to a type of teaching when your child engages in an undesirable behavior, makes an error, or does not know what to do. So really, if they're not engaging in the behavior that you want them to, it's likely that you may have to engage in some prompting behavior for them. So some types of prompts that you could use are vocal prompts. So you could vocally give them the answer, the direction in what to do. You could provide physical prompts, so showing them hand over hand exactly what they should be doing. You could model the behavior. So if your child has a really hard time with physical prompts, or if you would have to remove a toy from their hand or something like that, and that is really aversive to them, then maybe you could just select your own play material and model the behavior that you want them to do. And you could also provide gestures. So pointing to the area in which they need to focus on, or pointing to the other child's hand if they need to put that item there. It's also an option to coach the peer or sibling to prompt your child, like we've talked about in a couple of those other examples. So that may not seem as natural to you in the beginning because you're used to providing those prompts for your child, I'm sure. But try to really think about how you can fade out. And a great way to do that is the peer or sibling providing those prompts instead of you. But regardless of how you choose to prompt, just make sure that you're fading those prompts out and that your child isn't relying on those prompts all the time. Because that's going to make it really difficult for you to fade yourself out of the interaction if they're really reliant on your prompts and your engagement. All right, we're going to watch a video of prompting.
Now tell her what you want. Tell her what you want. Say, I need another piece.
I need another piece.
What kind of piece do you need?
Okay, so in this video, you can see that the child is wanting another piece of the train track. So the parent provides him with a vocal model of exactly what she wants him to say. She said, "I need another piece." And then the child echoed that specific request. But she also noticed that in that delay, so the sibling was trying to find another piece. It still seemed like she didn't really know what to do. So instead of the parent prompting the child in what to pick out, the specific type of piece, she tried to provide the other child with the language that they needed to prompt the other child. So she was like, "Tell her what kind of piece you need." But just thinking about ways that you can prompt them and be less intrusive are always going to be the route to go if you're able to, just so you're able to fade out of that interaction and the interaction's able to be more natural between them. And I also wanted to note here that all of these examples have been between vocal communicators, but your child may communicate in a different way. And in that case, you would just prompt the child or the sibling or the peer to request or respond in the way that they communicate. And you can also provide those prompts to the child or the peer. So if they communicate with a device, you could try to teach the sibling or peer how to use the device to communicate with them as well. So all of those modifications can be made for any type of communicator, even if they're just gesturing or pointing towards something. All of those modifications can be made to suit whatever learner your child is and communicator. Okay, so the last step is reinforcement. And there are two different types of reinforcement that we're going to talk about. So the first is positive reinforcement. And positive just means here that we're adding a preferred item or activity to the environment in order to increase the probability that the desired response will occur in the future. So you can positively reinforce your child's behavior by offering behavior specific praise, saying, I love how you shared your piece. You could give them access to a related or unrelated preferred item. Say they're playing with blocks and they're doing it, but it's not really their favorite activity, but they've started sharing with their sibling, and now you reward them with their favorite toy. So that would be an example of giving them positive reinforcement for engaging in those behaviors. And you could also allow access to stereotypy or some type of STEM if that's something that they are really motivated by. So let's say they got through that whole interaction, they didn't engage in that behavior, and now you're rewarding them with time to engage in that behavior because they engaged in the play behavior that you were seeking. Okay, so let's watch an example of positive reinforcement.
Okay, we're gonna play with some blocks. Archie, can you give that one to Griffin? Very good. We can give you a blue one. Griffin, show Archie how you stack them up.
Yeah. Thank you. I see my block right here.
That's so cool. Let's watch you build a tower. Stack them up, up, up. Oh man, we knocked them over.
Okay.
Let's try again. Archie, can you give this one to Griffin to stack? Very nice job. All right, how about this one? Can you give him that one? Nice job. Okay, Griffin, you're gonna stack one more and then we're gonna let Archie knock it over. Ready, Archie? 3, 2, 1. Did it! Woohoo!
So there's multiple forms of positive reinforcement that we can point out from this video. First, I, as the parent, am providing positive praise statements throughout the interaction for sharing the blocks and kindly doing things to one another. The child in the red is also providing positive reinforcement to the child in the blue by handing him the blocks that he needs to build his tower. And lastly, the child in the red is given positive reinforcement when he's rewarded for handing the pieces to his brother by being able to knock down the tower, which is really reinforcing for him. So these are all really natural ways that you can build in positive reinforcement without having to add anything extra to the interaction. Okay, so the next type of reinforcement that we're going to talk about is negative reinforcement. And the word negative does not mean that something bad is going to happen. It simply means that we're removing something unwanted or undesired from the activity in order to increase the probability of the desired response that we're looking for. So you can negatively reinforce a child's behavior by stopping the activity. If they ask appropriately, they say, I'm all done, or let's say they do something appropriate and then you remove the activity, that could be really reinforcing for them. You could also remove the sibling or peer from the interaction. And we talked about that before. That's a slippery slope because you're going to want to make sure that you focus really heavily on pairing. But for your child, if they asked appropriately for the child to move or anything like that, you want to reinforce that behavior, because if you don't, then they may start to engage in more aggressive or more challenging behavior to escape. And you don't want that to happen. If they're doing something appropriate, you might in the beginning just want to honor their request to be all done with the peer or sibling. You could also just take a break from playing together and regroup, refocus, and then come back at it. But if you're noticing that your child wants to escape the play interaction, like I said, it's a great time to focus on repairing that relationship. Okay, so here's an example of negative reinforcement.
Good coloring. Archie wants the other page. Let's take one more minute on this page and then we can switch pages again, okay? Let's see. Where did it go? There we go. There's your color. Archie, you could say my turn. You could say my turn.
My turn.
All right, we need to share the books. Or look, we can have, each person can have a book. Griffin, do you want your own book? No. You want the Paw Patrol book? Okay. Archie, how about this? Can you give this book to Griffin and you can get your own book? Nice job. There you go. Hey, you guys can each have your own book. You still want the purple crayon. How about you find a different color and you can trade Archie? All right, Archie, let's trade. Can you give Griffin the purple? Nice job. I love that sharing, you guys. Nice.
So in this video, the child in the red is having a difficult time sharing his materials with his sibling. And after a few unsuccessful attempts to get him to ask nicely with his sibling and have more functional communication, I decided sharing the materials was probably too big of a battle and too difficult for the child in the moment. So I decided to make the modification of getting them separate coloring books. But one important thing to note is that the child did not get out of coloring with his sibling by engaging in an inappropriate behavior. So when he was saying and pulling the book away, I did not provide him with reinforcement then. Instead, after he engaged in the verbal protest behavior and tried to take the book away himself, I showed him his new option. I said, hey, you can have your own coloring book, but I required him to give the other book to his brother, which was the appropriate behavior. So then after he engages in something appropriate, then I allow him to have his own book. So this would classify as negative reinforcement because by engaging in that behavior, he was able to remove his sibling from the materials that he wanted all to himself. So we removed the sibling from that specific material. So you can see that they're still engaging in the same behavior of coloring, but now they have their own materials, which made the interaction much more successful for them. All right, so now let's talk about troubleshooting, because I know that these interactions may not be easy or positive in the beginning, especially as you're starting out and your child isn't loving playing with a peer sibling. So let's talk about some of the ways that we can troubleshoot. So your plan did not go perfectly. That's okay. You can fix it at any time. You can fix it. So try to break it down behaviorally. You can look at if there's any skill deficits. So if you think that the skill that you placed or the demand that you placed is too difficult, you could try to break it down into a smaller skill. Or you could try to tackle less at once or pick a new activity. So if there's a skill deficit there that you're noticing, or it's just too difficult for your child, just make those small modifications, like getting them 2 separate coloring books that will help that interaction be more positive. You could also look if there's reinforcement issues. So you can change up the activity, you can change the schedule of reinforcement. So let's say you were able to start backing off and not being as much of a part of the interaction, but then all of a sudden things started going in the wrong direction and you have to get involved again. Basically, what I mean by schedules of reinforcement is that your child may need more or less reinforcement depending on the type of activity, the specific sibling or peer that they are engaged with. There could be a bunch of different variables. So just pay attention to how much reinforcement they seem to be needing and make sure that you're providing that as frequently as they need you to. You also want to look at competing stimuli or distractions. So find the alternative source of reinforcement. If they're pushing, the kid is crying, parent is yelling, the parent is, or the child is requesting to you instead of playing. You want to make sure that you're allocating your responding differently, just according to those interactions. So there could be a lot going on at once. But as we mentioned before, just try to fix one problem at a time, and make sure that if there's something in the environment that is causing them to have more trouble, make sure that you remove those things, or maybe you just shift to another location. And then parent interrupting. So pull the parent aside, giving them space, talk about the benefits of observing from a distance, all of those things that we talked about in observing. It could be that you're trying to be too involved in the interaction, and that's becoming aversive for your child. So you really want to think about how you're responding and your involvement is affecting the interaction as well, and make sure that you're catering to the needs of the child and the sibling or peer in that regard. All right, so last video example here, but we're gonna watch a video of when things aren't going the way that you want them to go. And we're gonna talk through some of the ways that this parent was able to tackle some of these problems in the moment without giving up.
Hey, you, I'm in front. Hey, you, put there. No. Hey, no. Hey,
We're gonna take, well, let's take turns. Okay,
no,
Nope.
she keeps running.
we can take turns. Emerson's gonna go first in front, and then you can take a turn. Do you need to be all done?
No,
Okay.
I want to be a run.
Emerson's gonna be in front for one more turn, and then it's your turn.
And now, knock it over.
Okay, now it's Grayson's turn to be in front.
But I mean,
Here's the turn piece, and Grayson's gonna be in front.
Okay, so as you can see in this video, things did not go as smoothly as this parent might have been wanting. It was really difficult for the child in the red to let his sibling be in front. Instead of giving up on the interaction, though, while things were going south, the parent de-escalated the situation by moving the two slightly further away from each other, blocking the child's attempt to knock the other child's train off the track. And you could tell that he was still upset about having to let her go first, but his behavior was de-escalated. He wasn't aggressing toward her. He wasn't knocking her materials over. And he was letting her have a turn, even though he clearly wasn't happy about it and was still protesting. But he did it. He let her have a turn. He wasn't happy about it, but that's okay. The parent still honored. He let her have a turn, and then he got to have his turn. So if the parent had allowed him to have his turn after engaging in those escalated behaviors, then it's likely that those behaviors would continue in the future because he was able to access what he wanted by engaging in those behaviors. But since the parent made sure that she followed through with that task and he still wasn't able to get his turn before he allowed his sister to have a turn, then that will hopefully be the behavior that increases next time. And he understands that he has to follow through with that before he gets his turn. So important things to note here. You want to make sure that you're setting realistic expectations. So it's important to remember that your child's not going to go from only playing alone and only wanting to play alone to engaging in cooperative play with others in one fell swoop. So it's important to celebrate those small victories, create achievable goals that will work up to your larger goal. And if you need to write that out too, maybe you write out your ultimate goal, and then maybe you write smaller goals along the way that will help you work those out. It can be really challenging in the beginning if you really want them to get to that larger step, to see the steps that it will take to get there. But it may just be great to write it out. And if you're working alongside a BCBA with your child, they can really help you identify some of those other ways that you could take those smaller steps to getting them there. So the key takeaways from this training are to observe, plan, coach, and reinforce. And all of those things are really crucial in making sure that you're setting up these interactions for success. So before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to answer a few that we've had previously just about the webinars in general. So will this webinar be recorded? The answer is yes. You'll be sent a link a few days after the webinar with the link to the recording, and you will be able to access any of the previous recordings that we've done or any of the trainings and webinars on our Bierman YouTube channel. And you can have access to all of those previous webinars, like I said, on that YouTube channel. You should just be able to look it up, but if you aren't able to access it, you can always reach out to your BCBA for help. So I wanted to mention too, some of our future webinars coming up. All webinars are at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Our next one is on August 4th. It's an introduction to ABA and occupational therapy. On August 18th will be our last discussion on play. We've been doing a play series for the last few months. So we're going to talk about cultivating pretend play exploration and really focusing on just imaginative play in general. And you can sign up for any of those webinars that interest you by going to this link below. And who will you contact for questions? So if you're a family on the wait list, if you are in interim care services, you will be assigned a BCBA during that interim care time. So you will reach out to that person and they should be able to give you more help, especially if you have specific questions for your child. If you're not in our interim care, you can contact that center's clinical director. If you're a current client with Bierman, you can contact your current BCBA. And if you're just a prospective client, you can reach out to info@biermanaba.com at any time. And if you have specific questions about this webinar, you can contact treva@biermanaba.com. And if you're interested in more training and you are a current client, then you can attend your center's group training sessions that they have periodically. So that concludes our presentation on peer and sibling play. I want to thank you guys so much for your involvement in this webinar, and I hope you've been able to take away some helpful strategies to facilitate some of those interactions for your child. I'm going to stick around on here to answer any questions that you may have for a few minutes. If you don't have any, you are free to log off, but thanks again for coming to this